When the guns of the Civil War finally fell silent in the spring of 1865, the air across the South was thick with both hope and uncertainty. Freedom, real freedom, had arrived on paper. But in practice, the meaning of that word would be tested on every street, in every field, and in every heart that had once lived in chains. In cities like Memphis, Tennessee, the end of slavery brought a wave of new arrivals. Thousands of freed men, women, and children left the plantations behind, searching for work, safety, and, most of all, family. They came by wagon, by foot, and by boat, following the muddy currents of the Mississippi toward what they believed was a new beginning. For many, Memphis was a beacon, a city alive with commerce, music, and faith. Here, they believed, the promises of emancipation could finally be made real. But freedom, they soon learned, was fragile. The same streets that echoed with songs of deliverance were lined with resentment. Many white citizens viewed the freed people not as neighbors, but as intruders, reminders of a war they did not believe they had lost. Former Confederate soldiers returned home embittered. Plantation owners faced ruin. And for those who had once owned human beings, the idea of equality was a wound that refused to heal. In the spring of 1865, federal troops still patrolled the city, their blue coats a visible promise of protection. The Freedmen's Bureau, newly established by Congress, opened its first offices in Memphis to assist the newly freed population, offering food, legal aid, and education. Schools began to rise in makeshift churches and abandoned warehouses. Black teachers, many of them former slaves themselves, taught children who had never before held a book. For a moment, the light of progress seemed to pierce the long shadow of bondage. But that light was brief. By early 1866, tensions in Memphis had reached a breaking point. Rumors spread of black soldiers disrespecting white civilians, of federal officers taking sides. In truth, the freedmen had simply begun to walk with dignity, no longer stepping aside on sidewalks, no longer bowing their heads. That dignity to those who once held power was intolerable. In May of 1866, the fragile peace shattered. Over the course of 3 days, white mobs, many of them police officers and firemen, descended on the city's black neighborhoods. Homes were looted and burned. Churches, schools, and meeting halls set aflame. Men and women were dragged from their houses and beaten in the streets. Dozens were killed, hundreds left wounded. The Memphis massacre was not an accident of chaos. It was a message, delivered with fire and gunpowder. Freedom, it said, would have limits. When federal investigators arrived weeks later, they found whole communities reduced to ashes. The Freedmen's Bureau documented the atrocities in careful, bureaucratic detail. Each testimony a reminder that emancipation alone was not enough to protect the living. The massacre shocked the North and steeled the resolve of Congress to act. Within months, new legislation expanded the power of the Freedmen's Bureau and laid the groundwork for the 14th Amendment, granting citizenship to all born in the United States. But in Memphis itself, scars ran deep. Many of the city's black residents fled. Those who remained learned a harsh lesson. The promise of equality would not come without resistance, and that resistance could be deadly. Yet even in the ruins, people rebuilt. Black churches rose again from the ashes, symbols of endurance and faith. Schools reopened, mutual aid societies formed, pooling coins and labor to care for widows and orphans. Through quiet acts of rebuilding, Memphis's freed community declared something simple and profound. They would not vanish. For every life lost in the massacre, 10 more voices carried the dream of freedom forward. Pastors preached hope from charred pulpits. Teachers held lessons under open skies. And mothers told their children that though freedom was fragile, it was real and worth fighting for. In the years that followed, Memphis would become a test case for the nation's future. Could a city built on slavery learn to live without it? Could laws and ideals overcome the power of prejudice and fear? The answers would unfold slowly, through the birth of Reconstruction, the rise of black political power, and the unrelenting backlash that followed. But for now, in 1866, the smoke still hung in the air. And amid the ruins of burned homes and broken promises, one truth remained. In the aftermath of the Memphis massacre, the South entered a new phase. The guns were gone, But the war for freedom had not ended. It had simply changed its form. Across Tennessee and the former Confederacy, white lawmakers gathered to rebuild their states. Their challenge was clear: how to restore their old order without restoring slavery by name. Their solution would come to be known as the Black Codes. Freedom, once declared, must still be defended. In the winter of 1866, Tennessee's legislature passed a series of laws that, on paper, appeared to maintain order. But in reality, they revived the essence of slavery through the language of law. Under the new codes, Black citizens were required to sign annual labor contracts. Those who failed to do so could be arrested for vagrancy, a crime defined so vaguely that it could mean standing still too long or being found without proof of employment. Once convicted, the punishment was swift: fines they could not pay, and forced labor they could not refuse. It was, in every sense, slavery reborn under a new name. In Memphis, the system took root quickly. The city's police and sheriffs, many of them former Confederate soldiers, began sweeping through Black neighborhoods in nightly raids. Men were taken from the streets for loitering. Women were charged with indecency for walking home after dark. Even children were not spared. Those arrested were marched into local jails, where they awaited judgment from city officials eager to profit from their confinement. Within months, the Shelby County Jail became a holding center for a new trade, one that blurred the line between punishment and profit. The system was simple and devastatingly effective. Once arrested, Black prisoners were leased by the city to private businesses: farmers, railroad companies, lumber yards, and brickmakers. They worked from dawn until dark under armed guards, often chained in groups. Their labor sold for a fraction of its worth. The companies paid the city paid the jailers. The prisoners received nothing. If a man grew sick or died, another was taken to replace him. It was an economy of bodies, built on paperwork and silence. The public justification was that the system saved taxpayers money. Its true purpose was to keep Black labor cheap and controlled. City officials described the prisoners as idle or dangerous. Newspapers called them vagrants, troublemakers, or Negro criminals. But the records tell a different story. Many of those convicted had committed no real crimes at all. A man who missed a work deadline, a woman who could not pay a fine, a youth caught singing too loudly in the street. One report from the Bureau of Labor described the conditions as worse than slavery, noting that the death rates among leased prisoners exceeded those on plantations before the war. In Memphis, the Mississippi continued its quiet work, carrying cotton bales and commerce northward, while the city beneath thrived on a new kind of trade. Factories that once relied on enslaved hands now depended on convict labor. Rail lines stretching into Mississippi and Arkansas were laid by men in chains, and the profits filled the pockets of city leaders who spoke of law and order. It was a system built not only on violence, but on the illusion of legality. The plantation had become a prison, the whip had become the law, but not everyone accepted this new order. Within the freed community, a quiet resistance began to form. Preachers denounced the new laws from their pulpits. Black veterans, men who had once worn the Union blue, patrolled their neighborhoods at night to protect their families. And educators, many of them women, risked their lives to teach literacy, knowing that knowledge itself was a form of freedom. In 1867, Memphis saw the founding of new schools and newspapers led by African Americans. Among them was the Memphis Planet, one of the first Black-owned presses in the region, dedicated to documenting injustice that the white press refused to print. Through ink and word, they fought to keep truth alive. By 1868, Reconstruction was taking hold across the South. Federal troops enforced new laws, and for the first time, Black men in Memphis began to register to vote. Their turnout was extraordinary. In some districts, they made up nearly half the electorate. For a brief moment, democracy in Memphis looked like the vision so many had died for, a nation finally becoming what it had promised to be. But every step forward was met with backlash. White vigilante groups formed in the countryside, styling themselves as patriots defending tradition. Night riders terrorized freedmen's homes, burning crops and lynching those who dared to organize. The names would soon become infamous: the Ku Klux Klan, the White League, and the Knights of the White Camellia. Their methods were terror. Their goal was control. As Reconstruction expanded, so did the resistance against it. Federal troops were stretched thin, and political will in Washington began to fade. Many in the North wanted reconciliation, not confrontation. But in Memphis, the struggle was far from over. The city had become a mirror of the South's soul. Its contradictions lay bare for the world to see. On one side, churches, schools, and voices demanding equal. On the other hand, lawmakers, merchants, and police are working quietly to maintain the old order by new means. The war for freedom had ended. In 1865, the battle for justice had only begun. By 1870, the promise of Reconstruction had begun to waver. Hope lived on in the voices of those who refused to yield. But the machinery of exploitation, legal, economic, and violent, was already being rebuilt piece by piece. And soon the same city that once celebrated emancipation would become a central hub in a new, invisible network of bondage. In the years ahead, Memphis would discover that freedom, without protection, was an illusion. By 1870, the war had ended, the chains had been broken, and the Constitution had changed. But across the South, the field still called for hands. Cotton had to be picked, timber cut, and railroads laid. Plantations that once thrived on slavery now faced a question that would define an era. Who would do the work, and at what cost? In Tennessee, the answer came through a new institution, one that dressed bondage in the language of business and law. It was called the convict lease system. The idea was simple. The state would lease its prisoners to private companies. In return, the companies would pay a fee to the government, cheap labor, no wages, no rights. To the lawmakers who designed it, it sounded efficient. To those who lived through it, it was slavery reborn. In Memphis, the system expanded rapidly. The Shelby County Jail became a gateway, a place where arrest meant something far worse than imprisonment. Under the new laws, nearly anything could lead to arrest. A missing work pass, an unpaid fine, even disrespect toward an officer. Once convicted, a man could be sentenced to months or years of labor and leased to whoever could pay the price. Railroad companies, sawmills, and mines lined up for the contracts. Prisoners were sent out in groups, chained by the ankle, guarded by armed men. They cleared land for tracks, built levees, and cut timber deep in the Mississippi forests. Few returned alive. Records from 1872 show that more than 70% of Tennessee's leased convicts were black. Most had been arrested under vagrancy laws or for so-called breach of contract. One local newspaper described them as dangerous criminals. But letters from witnesses told a different story. They described starvation, whippings, and disease conditions so brutal that even former slave owners called them unfit for beasts. In one Memphis report, an overseer admitted that leased prisoners were cheaper than mules. When a mule died, he said, "We lost money. When a prisoner died, we just asked for another." The system turned death into accounting, and Memphis became one of its busiest centers. The city's factories and workshops relied on convict labor to rebuild after the war. The riverfront bustled again, barges loaded with cotton, lumber, and stone, all produced by hands that were never paid. The illusion of progress hid the truth. Freedom had been replaced with contracts. Chains had been replaced with signatures. And the name of slavery had simply been changed to labor. One of the most notorious sites stood just outside Memphis, a stockade known locally as the Pen. There, men were housed in crude wooden barracks surrounded by barbed wire and guards with rifles. Reports describe prisoners sleeping on the ground, their clothes in tatters, their backs marked by lashings. Food was scarce, the disease was constant, and every morning as the sun rose over the Mississippi, they were marched out in lines, chains clinking, dust rising behind them. Many would never see freedom again. Yet even in that darkness, acts of defiance endured. Prisoners carved names into the wood of their barracks, messages for those who might come after. They prayed together at night, whispering the same words that had carried their ancestors through bondage. God sees, God remembers. And beyond the prison fences, the black community in Memphis continued to resist. Churches collected coins to buy freedom for falsely accused men. Families shared warnings about patrol routes, and black newspapers dared to print lists of names missing fathers, sons, and brothers, hoping someone, somewhere, might see and tell the truth. By the late 1870s, the convict lease system had become too big to ignore. Northern journalists began to investigate. They described the system as a machinery of death, but their reports changed little. Politicians defended the practice as necessary for progress. Investors pointed to profits, and the rest of the nation looked away. The South was rebuilding, and cheap labor was its foundation. Between 1870 and 1885, thousands of black men and women disappeared into the system. Some were buried in unmarked graves outside the city. Others were never recorded at all. In the ledgers of Tennessee's prison department, they were only numbers, entries beneath columns labeled leased, transferred, deceased. Their names were lost, but their labor built the roads, the railways, and the very wealth that allowed Memphis to rise again. The city that once promised freedom had turned bondage into an industry. And as the century approached its final decades, a darker secret began to emerge. A network of hidden auctions, whispered to exist beyond the reach of the law. The shadow of slavery had not only survived, it was evolving. If you believe history has lessons for today, smash that like button, share your reflections in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden stories of history and philosophy. Don't forget to hit the bell.